Hey, everybody. Hey, welcome back to the 53206 cast. I'm Alex.
And I'm Meg.
And people, this is a podcast first. I just want to make sure that everyone's well aware. This is a podcast. You listen to this on a podcast feed.
This is like the first minute that people are listening, and now they're just turning it right off.
Hey, it's good to know. It's good to know that, yes, this is a podcast. It's a podcast that's specifically designed to help us engage in the process of rethinking our inner city spaces. And Meg, today, I want to talk about something. I feel like we just did a podcast about this.
Oh my gosh, we have talked a lot about this, but this week has been, I feel like it's been disheartening. But I don't think it has been disheartening. I feel like we're up against this entity called the city of Milwaukee.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if we were on the same page.
Yeah, I think we just have different
because you
views
walked in,
of it.
Sometimes, listeners, I like to just like literally the second that Meg sits down, I like to hit the button for record, and then start the intro.
And I don't even know what we're talking about.
But it does sound like we're on the same page. Meg, I think the thing that have had, listeners, I've been working at the White House on the corner. Just to give a little background in case you're not familiar with the White House on the corner. And I've had to explain this to some people on the phone, people that work for the city of Milwaukee. And Meg, I do want to be very careful to say every person I talk to is very nice.
Every person
very kind,
who I engage with too from the city of Milwaukee is incredible. I think like the problem I just have is like the systems that they have in place aren't working for our community.
Well, yeah, and we'll probably get to that and then like talk about how you know that's true, and then maybe how to like rethink about that a little bit.
Sure.
So, the White House on the corner, whole backstory. So, White House on the corner was owned for a long time by a family. Family lived there. Probably this was like 2022-ish.
Years ago?
No, 2022.
Okay.
2022. That home was sold, and it was sold in the manner that we're familiar with because we get all these postcards, emails, letters in the mail, text messages with people asking to buy our houses. Yeah. And when you have a couple of houses, that multiplies the number of people that are reaching out to buy them. In fact, because I have the same first name as my dad, and my dad and my mom still have a landline, I believe they get a lot of phone calls because they're landline, like landlines are typically like more public record than maybe a cell phone would be. And so, same name.
So your dad like number. Talks with these people a lot.
All the time. All the time.
Which is funny.
And he's always trying to sell my houses for me for a ridiculous amount of money just to mess with the people. But so they, that was the process that was utilized for the owner to acquire the property. I think it's like a broker or like a dealer, kind of like how a used car system would operate, like a used car salesman. Like, they go to auctions.
And for those of us who aren't familiar with that.
Well, so basically like they're looking for leads.
Okay. So
they send you an obscene amount of information or text messages, phone calls, emails, whatever. Letters in the mail, and they're just looking for leads. So it probably cost them 10 cents to like send this text message.
Sure.
And so whatever, they must get enough people interested in it to justify doing this all the time. Yeah. And so that's how that house changed hands. So the gentleman that owned it, who I believe lived in Tennessee, got some type of messaging about the house and sold it very quickly to a broker, who then sold it to this woman in California. This woman in California owned the building for about a year, and did zero work to it. I was on the phone telling someone from the city that the water heater caught fire. It's pretty crazy for a water heater to catch on fire.
When did that happen?
So a water heater has a burner at the bottom of it, and the burner ignites when the temperature of the water gets too cold. Okay. And I didn't turn it off, and so I mean whatever. So some of that is on me, but about 3 weeks after I bought it, I walked down to the basement, and the water heater was so rusted out that it was leaking water into the basement, and so it was like continually running. Oh, okay. And then because it was continually running, it was always calling for heat because it was always trying to heat itself, and basically like the whole bottom of it was rusted out, and the burner was on.
Sure,
basically.
Huh.
So, just to give a listener kind of like a clue as to the state of the building that this woman from California was renting it to.
Yeah.
By the way, she was renting it to a family that, the kids came to the garden. That rent was more than any of the rents that we charge. And she was also renting it at one point to a group of the Kia boys.
Yeah.
The Kia boys. I always feel like if I'm a Kia boy, I just want to be a Kia man.
Oh, sure.
Why can't I be a man?
Sure.
But anyway, so she was renting it to a group of the Kia boys who were doing all sorts of nefarious things, stealing cars, leaving them out front, like the time that you saw that happen.
Yeah.
They were doing something that made other people want to shoot at them, which is the reason why there's a bullet hole in my truck, 16 bullet holes inside of the house, which I'm currently patching up. And it's a little... I want to say it's sad, but it elicits emotion when I'm covering up a bullet hole.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. I kind of left them towards the end because I just kind of didn't want to do them.
Yeah.
But when you fill them with drywall mud, it doesn't look like a bullet hole anymore. But just makes you feel something.
Yeah.
It's not like you're repairing a crack in the wall or somebody punched a hole in the wall. Like
somebody was trying to kill.
Somebody was trying to
inside.
kill somebody, and you're kind of just mudding over the evidence of that.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's something.
And so, so I could, and anyway, so that I had from a different, I was telling a group of other city of Milwaukee officials like this whole story because there's some other things that are going on with the building. That's really not what we're going to get into, I don't think.
Okay. But just to finish off the story, we did end up buying it from the woman in California. Just by like, I think just by
found her on LinkedIn.
Reaching out to her over
LinkedIn
and over
Plus
again.
Or LinkedIn Premium or something.
Trying to encourage her to like make the community better. And then she didn't. So then we're like, okay, hey, then you need to sell it.
Yeah. So anyways, I was over there a lot mudding.
Sure,
doing drywall work. And so I was on the phone a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And, in the news lately, there was this news article about a place not super close to us, but similar type of neighborhood that was getting tires dumped on.
Yeah, a lot.
And a lot of tires, 5,000 was the estimate. And so somebody, and this was all in the news, so I don't fact check the news, but I would assume what the news is saying is correct. Yeah. So a guy had started a business, efficient tire disposal or something, and was basically able to, or had convinced people to pay him $2 a tire to get rid of tires.
And how much does the dump charge for tires?
Tires at the dump are $5.
Okay.
So good deal, right?
Sure,
like he'll come to your house, he'll take your used tires, he'll come to your auto shop.
Yeah.
Tire shop down the road's got a couple hundred tires sitting in it. So for $2 a tire, he'll take the tires and he'll get rid of them. When he gets rid of them, he dumps them in this vacant lot that the city now owns. It used to be a nightclub, something like that. And so in the news lately has been this concept around dumping, which we talk about on the podcast a lot. And, it's always curious or fascinating to me to talk to somebody that has no concept of your neighborhood gets dumped on. And, so that's why we want to talk about it on the podcast. And so, we bought this other house at the other end of the block, trying to expand a little bit down to the other end of the block.
Yeah.
And so...
And it's right next to the We Got This garden, so we'll be able to water without...
Yeah, so we'll be able to run a hose over there so we can have water...
Before the city comes with the hydrant.
Yeah, before the hydrant, which is like May. Typical garden.
Yeah.
You're just not the typical gardener, so you want your hose...
I want it ready.
ASAP.
Yeah.
At all times you want to have a hose. So, bought that house, and I was on my run, and Meg, Wednesday is the 3,000th day in a row that I'll have run 3 or more miles. If I make it to Wednesday.
I know. Yeah.
Every single day. Today it was snowing in the morning, and I thought, maybe today I'll take the day.
Oh my gosh.
No, I didn't think that.
Yeah.
But if I make it to Wednesday will be the 3,000th day in a row I've run 3 or more miles. That's at least 9,000 miles in that amount of time. A lot of times there are longer runs than that, but and so I run, down. I leave our house and I go down to 1.75 miles away on the same street, and I turn around and I come back most days. Or that's like the standard run.
Yeah. I still don't understand how that doesn't get boring.
Well, it doesn't get boring because there's always something to look at.
Yeah.
There's always something to look at. In particular, the thing I was looking at on Thursday was the new house that we bought, the garden house.
Yeah.
And because, I want to make sure, speaking of dumping, that house doesn't get dumped on.
Because if it does get dumped on, you get fined.
Yeah. And so it did get dumped on.
Okay.
And so, I thought to myself, okay, well, I'm going to just get rid of all this stuff. But I feel like it occurred to me that, how sometimes like you remember when our house was broken into? I didn't even think we did actually call the police.
Well, our house got broken into twice, and one of the times we didn't.
One of the times we didn't call the police?
Yeah, I think I don't know.
I don't
think
we did
one of them was
either
like
of the times.
We were coming back from the Iron Man.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was 9:30 at night.
Yeah, I don't think we did.
Yeah.
I don't remember filling out a police report.
Okay.
But hey, listener, if you want to learn more about that story is in the book Bad Neighborhoods, which is also on a podcast feed. All you got to do is search Bad Neighborhoods in any podcast app or program that you use, and you can find the entire book is available as an audiobook
and
on
then
that podcast feed.
We did do a podcast on that. I believe it was called, the podcast name was Backpack Full of Trauma.
Oh, that was what that one was?
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
It was a memorable one.
No, I think that's a title of a different chapter of the book that talks nothing about that. So it's interesting.
Really?
But anyways, so, the only reason why that would have made me think, talk to the police when the house is broken into is so that they have information of like, hey, there was a break-in here.
Yeah. So they could document like, hey, there's been several break-ins on this block or something like that.
And because I think like, okay, if there's 6 break-ins on the same block, well, then maybe that triggers
they
something.
Patrol more or something. Yeah.
Right. So maybe that does something. Okay. So in my head, I'm like, well, I'm dropped the kids off at school. So I pulled the truck around to start cleaning up the space at the garden house.
That just got dumped on.
And, I think to myself, okay, I don't really want to do this, but I'm going to call, because I know there's like a 286
city,
2468 I think is city.
Sure.
And so I've called the number a lot, so I know exactly. Because sometimes when I'm like trying to get some additional information, people just give me that number, and I'm like, oh no, you can't just give me the city number. You got to give me a real number here.
Yeah.
So I call that number, and I'm talking to the dispatch person.
Okay.
And I'm kind of saying like, okay, I just want to report an instance of illegal dumping.
Yeah.
So my property was illegally dumped on.
Yeah.
I just want to report that so that you have that information. Because, I would assume somebody would take that information and at least have the ability to do something about it. Well, and like
we've talked a lot about the streetlights being out. And so when you call that number and you say that the streetlights are out, they actually do document how many times like people have called in one area.
Sure.
So that's
because like it triggers a response, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And it's just super interesting because I've gotten kind of into trying to understand. I've always been interested in understanding systems, and I've been getting into now trying to understand. Well, like how does the information that the city take in, like how is that system created?
Yeah,
and like what are
how do we work within that system?
How do you work within that system
better?
Yeah, how do you work in alignment with the
Yes.
system
Yes.
and not work against the system, basically? Or how is the system aligning towards, some goals that you and I might have?
Yeah.
And how is it in contrast to those? And then how do you live with that knowledge, right? So, I made a phone call and, the lady said, well, there's this online form you can fill out. And immediately, the alarm bells go off in my head. I'm like, a lot of old people around here that don't have a ton of money.
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody's got Wi-Fi. People probably do now.
Yeah.
But like, okay, that's like a barrier.
Yeah.
First off, and I'm somewhat in my own mind and in the course of my own life, I've just been aware of barriers. You just don't want barriers.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I tell a lady like, it's kind of sucks. Like, I gotta first off end this phone call with you, find the form online, fill out the form online. Yeah. Okay, fine, whatever. But then I thought like, well, what does that do? Like, when I fill this out, what am I doing? Like, what does that do?
Yeah.
And so I asked her, and I'm glad I asked because the form, if you fill out the form online, then it basically is like, telling the sanitation department to come to your property and do something, give you a quote for what it's going to cost to clean it up, or they come and clean it up, and then it costs you,
Sure. Yeah.
Like, Meg, it's very similar to if you or I were to put out like 4 couches behind our garage. Like, I don't expect the garbage men to pick up 4 couches.
Yeah.
Like, that's not their job. It's
Yeah.
not their role. However, they will pick up 4 couches if you tell them I have 4 couches.
Yeah.
And then you'll be assessed an appropriate amount of money to have that happen. That's a great option for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So she was explaining that to me, and I was like, well, I'm going to get rid of this. Like, I don't want this.
Yeah.
And then, so then I said, well, like, can't I just tell you over the phone that my property was dumped on?
Yeah.
Just so that you have, like, at least some data about where, because, Meg, I tell a lot of people, like, I think our alley might be one of the most dumped on alleys in the entire city. I would have a hard time seeing a place that's dumped on more than ours.
Yeah.
And wouldn't you, I would assume somebody would want
that information.
Some of that information, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, so I said, well, can't I just tell you, and then you just put it in your system that, this happened?
Yeah.
Because I would think, like, the dumping czar would want to know.
Sure.
Like, okay, we got a problem over here.
Yeah.
Like, maybe we can do something. And, she was super honest with me, and I really appreciated her frankness on it. She said, no, because that then you're basically, like, calling for a City of Milwaukee inspector to come out and issue you a citation for the...
You're tattling on yourself.
You're tattling on yourself.
Wow.
And I'm like, well, I don't want...
Yeah, why?
I
I'm
want to
not
tattle on
going to do
myself
that.
because, like, first off, I'm going to clean it up.
Yeah.
And second, like, well, that's not really what I want.
Yeah.
And then I, was like kind of asking her some follow-up questions about that. And, I'm like, well, next to this property, I'm keeping... I bought this like 3 or 4 weeks ago. So it's like, it does take a while to get it to look like somebody else owns it, that it's being taken care of, because it hasn't been taken care of for 3 years.
I mean, it's been like, we bought it in February and now it's March. Like, you can't do that much.
Right. I can't put a fence up because the ground's frozen.
Yeah.
Like,
I can't put flowers up.
Fence up. Yeah. So, okay. So I totally know, like, going into buying this house, like, that's going to be an issue. Next to that house is a house with a giant hole in the roof. It's very obvious that no one lives there.
They didn't mow it at all last year.
It wasn't 0 times it was mowed.
At all. Yeah.
Next to that is a small flower field that we got this operates, and then next to that is the house that burned down.
Yeah.
So
we've called it the dump for a while.
Literally the dump.
Yeah. There's been a car dumped there. There's been boats dumped there. It's just it's been the dump for a while.
I called to have stuff picked up probably March 1st. I would want to say very end of February, March 1st. And it takes. I totally get it. It takes a little while for that to happen.
Yeah.
But I know that if a place is clean, it
Yeah.
has a higher chance of staying clean, and a place that's dirty gets stuff added to it at a higher rate. And so, like, I want this other stuff.
Yeah.
I clean up my yard.
Yeah.
And I want this other stuff out of here fast. And so, I had called in this, and I didn't have these lengthy conversations with the call center people, but I was like, okay, there's a mess over here, and it got cleaned up eventually.
Yeah.
Within 5 days, maybe.
Okay.
And I don't know if it was the next day, but like 2 days later, there was stuff there.
Sure.
So, like, this is just, I just know that it's always going to be a constant battle with this. So, and when I eventually ended the conversation with her, it was like, well, you have no data on where these things are happening. How could you ever have a proactive response?
Sure.
If you don't know, 9th and Burleigh is a pretty heavy dump zone.
Yeah.
You would never know that.
Yeah.
And so then I contacted the dumping czar.
Yeah.
Again, super nice lady. Talked to her.
Okay.
And Meg, I'm telling you all this.
Is that her actual job description? Okay.
I just call her the dumping czar.
Just checking.
I think her name's Jenny or something like that. Again, super nice lady. And, I'm explaining all this, and I'm just like, hey, you might want to think about just like collecting this information. Yeah. Like, I'm sure there's a button you could click. You could change your form, so there's a button you could click that, like, no response needed. Yeah, just collect the data, no response needed. I think that would cost I don't know, you're a web designer.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a lot to add to a form. Yeah.
Right. It wouldn't be a lot to add to a form. But okay. But I want to talk about, and you kind of started this whole thing. I do get frustrated, but I had a lot of experience working in schools where we had like a very specific mission statement. The mission was that we were going to be doing this thing called deeper learning, which involved a lot of project-based learning, a lot of experiential learning. We needed to get people out into the community and do things. And, you kind of need some resources to do that. And I don't want to totally get into like this very, very specific example of what happened. But a lot of times when you're trying to make a system do the things that you think it should do, or you're trying to make a change in general, it's foolish if all of your energy is spent being frustrated on the system instead of helping people with the power to change it, to maybe see things a little bit differently. Yeah. So, when I ended my conversation with the dumping czar, I wasn't frustrated. Yeah. In my head, I thought, well, maybe there'll be a point tomorrow or a week from now or 6 months from now that the dumping czar remembers my conversation with her. Yeah. And is in communication with somebody else who maybe sees the same thing that I pointed out. Yeah. And maybe they will add the button to the form. Yeah. And so, and I think I think it's not worth the effort of getting frustrated when you're trying to make some sort of larger scale change. Yeah. It's more the time is better spent on helping someone else see what might be useful, or helping someone else see your vision. Yeah. Like if the vision for Meg, you and I, and for We Got This is that we want kids to grow up in a clean neighborhood, we want other people on board with that. Yeah. And, I met a lot of people that would have like a very specific idea that they're trying to sell someone. Like if I had called her up and demanded that they had a button on the form, my only win is if a button goes on the form. Yeah. What I really want is I want the city of Milwaukee to have some proactive strategies about dumping.
I think that was the thing that really stood out to me, was that there's no way for like our community to be better if everyone's just getting penalized. Sure. And that is the current, and that, it's like all those, you can draw all these conclusions like the one that you just did. The only time they want the information. Yeah. And again, this isn't like the dumping czar is evil. No. It's just the system it needs to be tweaked.
Yeah. And you are making the most change when you find a system that isn't quite right and you're tweaking it to make it better. Well, that's where change comes in. Well,
and I think and I'm not sure if it was your idea or my idea, but like we were kind of thinking like we should have some kids from We Got This try to tackle this. So like I feel like if anyone has ideas on how to tackle this, how to, provide some, I don't know, even just some ideas on how to make this better, we would love those ideas. And we would also love if anybody, I don't know, if there was like a project that somebody wanted to really dive into with dumping, and you wanted to work with We Got This summer, we would just love some more ideas and some more resources in that direction. Because I really do believe that, if we took this problem to a group of kids that were passionate about figuring this out, they could figure it out. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I like the dumping czar. I'm sure the dumping czar is, because I never want to communicate like, oh, the dumping czar sucks. Yeah. Because I'm sure she's fine. Yeah. But she did not have any proactive strategies to offer me. She could not give me any information about, how often my neighborhood is dumped on. And quite frankly, I wouldn't believe any of the information that she gave me because they don't, even at the most basic level, collect any of that information. And in part, I wanted to know if it was collected because I thought, like where you're going with this, Meg, is if we could prove that kids from We Got This curbed dumping by 50% because they did X, Y, and Z, well, then that would add to the toolkit for everybody to say, okay, well, let's try these couple of things.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure that there are. I'm just always very careful because I'm not on the podcast. Like we're not trying to call anybody out or say you're doing a bad job, but really there weren't any proactives. She could not give me a single proactive strategy. Yeah. And I think a lot of, I think dumping is somewhat on the gray area of like whose responsibility is this actually to solve this problem. Yeah. And what if it's in the gray area, like murders, for example, that's the police's responsibility. Yeah. Like that's not a gray area. It's not really my responsibility. Mm-hmm. Right. But dumping, it's a little bit more in the gray, like, well, it's part community, it's part some other government entity. Yeah. And I'm very interested in looking for possible solutions because, Meg, the garden lots on 9th Street, those used to be dumped on all the time. Mm-hmm. And
they're still dumped on a little bit
sometimes
here and there.
But
did you see all that trash that was dumped there?
No, I didn't.
Yesterday. There was like bags of trash that are just all over.
But I would say someone that is engaged in the process of dumping is a human being, and a human being will make a decision on where they're going to dump. Yeah. And I do think just based on the data on our own block, our half of the block has several houses that are in great shape. Yeah. A decent number of them I've completed. And I think that has made an impact on the amount of dumping that exists on our half of the block versus the other half of the block.
Yeah, and even like I just talked with a neighbor yesterday, like 2 houses down from us, and I was just saying like, hey, how are you doing with like all the dumping stuff? And he's like, I can only make my little piece of the block better. Sure. And I thought, thank you. Like that is incredible. But I think like another reason that this is so important is just because, people go outside of their, their garage, of their house, and they see this. And I think something that impacted me was hearing a story from a woman that, she gardens with her daughter. And she was just saying how her daughter doesn't even want to garden in her backyard anymore because there's so much trash right behind their space. Because those lots aren't taken care of. And so I feel like this is just, it's an important issue. It's just something that you have to look at it all the time. And it's so discouraging. So it can be discouraging. And Alex, I appreciate your outlook that, we can change the systems because it can be discouraging looking at it. And, every day there's more trash there and it gets blown around. I was walking down the alley yesterday and like this piece of trash almost like hit me in the face. And I'm like, come on.
Yeah. Well,
so we will put out there that this can change, and hopefully, we'll get some listeners that have some ideas. We'll get some kids that have some ideas, and that's what we can do.
Yeah, specifically, I guess, if there was a listener that wanted to work with a group of kids to come up with some ideas, try some things out, and be a part of the Saturday program at We Got This, they could reach out and indicate that they were interested at contact@wegotThisMKE.com. We're always looking to expand the we in We Got This, and I think one of the big pushes this year, because we're trying to give out $35,000 to kids, is to expand the we, because we need more people involved that want to be a part and see something positive and productive happen in our neighborhood, which then translates to neighborhoods just like ours.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.